Content warnings with this story include medical trauma from Fatale's backstory and her ongoing issues with her cyborgness, and also quite a few instances of characters being kidnapped and tied up, because that's a very common superhero trope. It happens frequently, although there's not like an insane amount of peril in it, and the characters treat it kind of casually because it's such a common trope in superhero media. It's kind of like a Megamind situation with that, but it's still worth mentioning because the imagery, regardless, can be triggering to some people. I don't record House Flipper very often because it's been giving me issues where, like, 99 times out of 100 it will just not load. But this is the one time in 100 it did load, so I spent about 5 hours making a more modern aesthetic version of the Titan's Tower. So I'm pretty proud of this B-roll, so I appreciate if you gave it a glance every now and then. Also, there are some thematic spoilers for Soon I Will Be Invincible. I kind of talk about where character arcs will end up in more general terms, but I don't really talk about the solution to the mystery or the exact details of how things end up. So it's up to you whether that'd be too much spoiler for you. But I would recommend this book if you like superheroes. Hey guys, Spot here. So, invincibility. It's a topic that comes up in a lot of superhero fiction. It's one of those tropes that is almost key to the whole genre. And it's one that pretty much everybody has a different take on. Like every superhero writer has a different take on. And it's always interesting to see how other people think about power and invulnerability and what that does to a person, whether it's even possible. Because nowadays, power in this world has become incredibly imbalanced. So it's interesting to see how different people, like, talk about that. But then also, superheroism and superpowers isn't always just about institutional power or innate, like, physical ability. Sometimes it's used as a reference, as a analogy, or to draw attention to issues of ability and disability and neurodivergency and diversity of talent and bodies and minds and abilities in general. And I find that equally fascinating, and it kind of ties into the whole power dynamic idea, because disabled people and people who don't have particular skills that are valued by capitalism can be highly underestimated, even though in a lot of situations they have exactly what you need to get the job done. I'm thinking of Aquaman and a lot of parodies of Aquaman. People are like, oh, you can talk to fish and stuff, but like when you're near a large body of water and you need a powerhouse, Aquaman is that powerhouse. And considering the Earth is 70% ocean, it's just bad luck that a lot of the shit happens on the 30% where Aquaman is slightly out of his element. Like, I will not tolerate Aquaman slander in this house. Anyway, that was a completely random tangent. I don't know if it will tie in with anything later on. We'll see. So yeah, power and ability is a very versatile and very fluid concept. And the idea of invincibility and whether it's attainable or not is something that is it is explored in the audiobook, or I guess it is a physical book as well, but I listened to the audiobook, so I will be talking about the audiobook. The story of Soon I Will Be Invincible. So, the basic plot summary of Soon I Will Be Invincible. Well, the plot's a little meandering and it has a lot of exposition, but it kind of feels like a combination of mystery, like a murder mystery, villain's evil plot mystery. Half the chapters are from the villain's point of view, so some of the plot is following the villain as he's trying to do his evil plot. So I guess that's more of a dramatic irony thing, because you know the evil plot, it's just a matter of whether the heroes will find it out. But then it also kind of reads like a class reunion almost, or like characters kind of running into old classmates and stuff, but with superpowers. So it's a very kind of self-reflective book, and very genre savvy and self-aware, so that leads to a lot of great humor, especially with the narrators. Their line delivery is like immaculate, especially the one who narrates from the villain Dr. Impossible's point of view. Like, he has a lot of personality. I love when narrators get really into character in their readings. It just adds so much and really makes the audiobook a very different experience than just reading the physical book. So, and it does have a lot of archetypes that have been seen in comic books and stuff in the past. However, I think it does enough different things with them and gives the characters enough nuance overall that is still an interesting read if you like superheroes. So if you really like superhero fiction and you want to read more of it, then Soon I Will Be Invincible is a great one to add to your library. Especially if you like villains, and if you like villains who are just evil for the sake of being evil, because that's what Dr. Impossible is. I mean, he does have an origin story, and it is like you can see where he got to where he is, but it also does have a bit of cartoon logic as well. I have sort of mixed feelings on the combination of cartoon logic and like real world person logic, but I feel like there's enough done to blend those two ideas together that feels believable enough. So overall, I would recommend it to people who like superheroes. It's a fun ride, especially the audiobook. So the theme of invincibility is explored in this book with the two POV characters. There's Fatal, the cyborg lady who was rescued from the brink of death after a horrific accident in Brazil. She was patched together with cybernetic implants, and half her brain was also replaced by a computer, so she's missing a lot of memories. So she has some vague idea of who she might have been in the past, but she's really focused on who she is now. And who she is now is somebody who was groomed to be the next generation of warfare. Like, everything about her was made to kick ass and take name. She has thoughts about that she kind of explores, meditates on throughout the series. She's a recent member of the resident super team, the Champions. And the Champions have kind of been past their heyday. They're all middle-aged or approaching middle-age now, except for the newer members who are like Vital is like 20-something, mid-20s, I believe, and there's a teenager, Rainbow Victor. I think it's Rainbow Victory. Rainbow Triumph. Rainbow Triumph is a teenage, almost like a pop idol, who's been groomed since she was like 7 to be a superhero. Really wish we got a whole book about her, honestly, because that's interesting. I just ordered Jeanette McCurdy's book, I'm Glad My Mom Is Dead. So I'm thinking about child stars and what they go through. So I kind of wish they went more into Rainbow Triumph's thing, but I get that she's not the focus, and that would kind of derail the whole theme of the story. I don't know, but I would read a sequel to that, or a spin-off with Rainbow Triumph. So Fatal just recently joined the Champions because they need her tech skills and combat skills in order to find their missing member, Corefire. And Corefire is kind of this universe's, well, he is exactly this universe's Superman. What happened was, I'm not sure if that's a spoiler or not. So I'm not going to say what happened, but something happened to create Corefire, and now he's basically invulnerable. They haven't found anything that can kill him. He's like the American Golden Boy, you know the type. And he's gone missing. This coming off the heels of a major Pyrrhic victory that resulted in the loss of another beloved member of their original group has really sent the Champions into just a downward spiral. They technically are still a team, but they're kind of hanging on by a thread. So this is the world that Fatal finds herself in, and she's kind of simultaneously starstruck and feels like she's in over her head, and also is just excited to be on a team and sad that they're not the Paragons that they once were. Paragon is a character in the books. She recently joined along with semi-reformed villain Lily. Lily is like almost completely invisible, and that's her main superpower, although I think she has super strength and stuff as well. This is one of those universes where the characters don't generally just have one power, and any power they have tends to have the side benefit of super strength and super durability in order to make for large scale fights. Like even the almost all brains Dr. Impossible also has super strength and durability after his accident, just so that he can take a few punches, although he never really wins in hand-to-hand combat, like ever. That seems to be a very common theme in comic books, to allow for spectacle. And there definitely is spectacle. The fight scenes in this book are well done. I can generally tell what's going on in the fight scenes. Some can get a little bit confusing, but it's easy to tell who's on the winning side, who's on the losing side, and when the tables change, and whether anything plot important happens. But the book's real strength is in when the characters are just interacting with each other and having conversations. The dialogue is really well done. It feels natural. It feels like how people actually talk. And again, this book is very self-aware and genre savvy, so that leads to a lot of interesting and sometimes funny conversations. Like, I've laughed out loud listening to this book at some point. And at work, people were watching. It was awkward. So it's interesting how the two POV characters deal with the themes of invincibility. So Fatal has gone through something horribly traumatic with that, basically being run over by a dump truck in Brazil and having amnesia from it, but also remembering enough of the trauma to like, she doesn't explicitly state that she's traumatized or anything, and she doesn't, like, her internal reflection doesn't really dwell on it too much. But it's clear from her actions that it has affected her. Like, she's closed off and kind of retreats to her machine side a lot of the time, and also has some issues with accepting her machine side. She does say, I lied, she does talk about, like, having half her body replaced by a machine and having a lot of issues with that. She kind of pushes it aside generally, but she'll have moments of shock where she wakes up and feels like she's sleeping next to a mannequin, but it's actually her own body. Which, if you've gone through medical trauma, that feeling of your body not being your own, or like feeling like your body is a stranger, or you are a stranger in your own body, that's something that could potentially be relatable. So, to her, even though she is close to invincible because of her enhancements, she wins a lot of fights and everything, her machine side actually leads to some vulnerabilities that she doesn't see coming when other characters know how machines work as well. And it also leads to kind of an internal vulnerability about her still human feelings and desires for companionship and everything, when she's still trying to figure out where she fits in the world, and whether she's even worthy of or able to have those connections. And she slowly gets better at this over the series and learns to rely more on her team and starts to make friends, and that's really nice to see. I said series, it's one book. I was listening to a bunch of series before that, sorry. So she has a kind of meditation on invincibility and survival and stuff at the end. And then we get to Dr. Impossible, who is kind of a foil to Fatale. He kind of is former gifted kid to the extreme. He was told that he was a genius. He was academically smarter than all of his peers, and kind of threw himself into his studies. His parents were emotionally distant, which probably did not set him up for success later on. And in fact, he'd spent as little time at home as possible, if I remember correctly. So he kind of isolated himself and threw himself into his academics, which I can relate to. So his former gifted kid syndrome was kind of left to fester, and he ended up taking a very villainous route with it. Since nobody will accept me, I will take over the world and force them to adore me, type thing. Which is it's very funny to listen to, and his insane logic leads to some very fun scenes. There is a lot of comic book logic to it, but then it also comes from a very human angle of, like, your abilities separating you from people. And one of his goals throughout the series is to become invincible, and whether that's even attainable or not. That ties into Core Fire, the previously untouchable, undefeated hero going missing, and the fallout from that, which throws that into question. And he starts looking into, like, everybody thinks he did because he's a bad guy, but he's like, no, I didn't, but I'd like to know too, because whoever's stronger than Core Fire, I gotta find out what makes them tick. Basically, he just goes further, it digs his own hole further, just goes further into his science experiments, kind of worships science as a religion, which, if you've seen Full Metal Alchemist, you know where that leads. Thankfully, it doesn't lead to that in this case. Not that horrific thing that happened in Full Metal Alchemist. Not quite that bad, but it does lead to him being further and further alienated from, like, everybody. He used to have a relationship, he used to have a few friends, but he has such a high opinion of himself at this point that nobody can measure up to him in his own mind. And so he ends up being very narcissistic and very lonely. All in this search to be invincible, which contrasts to Fatale, who she starts opening up and becoming more vulnerable as the book goes on, and ends up at the end being emotionally stronger, gaining some closure, and finding some friends and finding purpose, starting to thrive rather than just survive. So it seems like in this book, invincibility kind of means the same thing as resilience. A lot of superhero stories have trauma as one of their themes. Spider-Man's a big one. The trauma of Uncle Ben dying leads to Spider-Man becoming a hero. Batman has a similar backstory with his parents dying, and then he becomes a hero from that. And then there's the Renegades trilogy, which, like, explicitly in that trilogy, superheroes get their powers usually after some traumatic event where they had to, like, develop superhuman powers in order to survive. And that seems to be the kind of thing that's happening in Soon I Will Be Invincible. Although there's a huge variety of origin stories, because it's based on, like, a comic book universe where there's a huge amount of characters, from the magical and supernatural to the scientific to the, like, just very skilled people in the case of Black Wolf, aka the Batman clone. And kind of showing that, like, just because you can take a punch and everything doesn't mean that you can handle what's in your own mind. And that can lead people down very different paths. Like, I think if Dr. Impossible had a better handle on his own issues, he might not be failing so many of his missions, because he's always so sure of his own intelligence and doesn't rely on anybody except his robots. So I think this is a very well done story that involves a theme that's common in a lot of superhero stories, but honestly I'm a sucker for. I always love seeing it. The No Man is an Island theme, where just because you have superhero powers, just because you can take a punch, does not mean that there's nothing you can't do. Does not mean that you can just do everything by yourself without relying on other people. The Incredibles did a great job of that. Avengers Endgame as well. Invincible, obviously, and then this one, Soon I'll Be Invincible as well. Because we tend to forget that we are animals, we are a social species. We were wired to rely on others. We cannot get away from that no matter how many superpowers we have. So it's always great to see when writers acknowledge that and are aware of that when they're writing superhero stories, because a lot of superhero stories can be power fantasies where it's just the one guy mowing down dozens of mooks by himself. And people look at that and they're like, yeah, I want to be like that. But that's not really a healthy goal to aspire to. It's not attainable and it's not sustainable. And that's something else that I love about superhero stories, is ensemble casts where everybody has wildly different abilities and personalities, but they're all stronger when they're together, because when a situation comes up where one person has a weakness, another person could have a strength. Like, say we're going up against snakes and the leader is afraid of snakes, but their right-hand man does not fear them and in fact maybe has a pet snake. So the right-hand man decides to take over as the leader temporarily to get the snake situation figured out. That's just something I'm pulling out of thin air. But ensemble casts just are really great because it seems like with the job market the way it is nowadays, there's only a very specific personality type that can ever actually be hired. Like, you have to be a people person, first and foremost. You have to love people, you have to love talking to people, you have to love being around people, you have to be an extreme extrovert. Even if you're working in a fucking warehouse. Second, you have to never be sick, never need time for yourself, never need to go to a friend's wedding, or, I don't know, take your sick cat to the vet, or trip up the stairs and sprain your ankle and need to go to urgent care or whatever. You need to be a morning person because a lot of jobs start out early in the morning, and you need to be up at like 5-6 a.m. every day unless you want to work overnight, but there's no in between. You have to be either up at 6 a.m. or work overnight. Those are the only two sleep schedules. And on top of all these, you also have to be the specific type of person they want to see in a job interview. You have to be pleasant and personable and businesslike and polite, a complete ass kisser. No matter what job you want to do, you have to be a job interview person. It doesn't matter if you can do the job, if you can't play the office politics, if you can't get all the little social minutiae right, you're not qualified to do the job. Even if your job involves staring at a computer for 8 hours a day and not interacting with anybody. So with that kind of environment, it can really feel like there's no room in the world for anybody else. So it is just great to read superhero stories where people with wildly different abilities and personalities work together to get the job done. Like, that's why I like Batman so much. He's a weirdo, he's antisocial, he stays up all night and dresses like a bat, and yet he's one of the most capable superheroes, and he's the one people go to first when there's a problem. And actually, I have a headcanon that Batman is somewhere on the autism spectrum, due to his high sense of justice, his preference for dark clothes and nighttime when the lights are less bright, and his avoidance of social interactions, and how blunt he is. The fact that he puts on that growly voice when he goes to fight criminals, that's not his natural voice, kind of like how autistic people mask when they are around people. So, I'm not the only person who thinks that. I've seen a couple blog posts where people point that out. And I think the author of Soon I Will Be Invincible has also seen those same blog posts, because Black Wolf, the Batman clone in Soon I Will Be Invincible, is actually autistic. Like, definitively in text, they say he is diagnosed autistic, and even as an adult, he is mentioned to be, like, constantly fidgeting, and people say that he acts weird, and, like, even Dr. Impossible says at one point that his autistic hyperfixation and his faster processing speed kind of helps him in fights, because he can process things so much faster when he's interested in them. So that was a really neat thing to see that, and he's a major character. He's like one of the main members of the group, and he is a bit of a love interest, and he has a little romantic arc going on, a little bit of a love triangle-ish situation. So he is romantic. He's is specifically described as attractive and popular with the ladies and romantically desirable. And it's never said despite his autism or anything stupid like that. It's just because of who he is as a person. He is somebody who Fatale likes and finds desirable. So that was really neat to see. That was pretty good representation. Although sometimes there is some sort of insensitive phrasing in this book, like one of the minor villains is described to have a schizophrenic look about him. And I don't know if he's meant to actually be schizophrenic or if that was meant as a descriptor. Although considering the autistic character was described to have an autistic look about him, I think it's meant that he actually has schizophrenia, which, that's not great. I feel like that was maybe a blind spot in the writer's situation, that maybe like doing a little research into schizophrenia and representation might have helped with that, but I don't think it was outright malicious. But I also don't have schizophrenia, so I can't speak for how that would affect schizophrenic people. And I think this neurodiversity representation actually kind of ties into the idea that people cannot be invincible on it. Lenny, why? Stop pulling at the carpet. I'm renting this place. You cannot do that. I'm not going to get my security deposit back. Do I need to explain to you what a security deposit is, you child? What was I talking about? Oh yeah, neurodiversity and how that ties in to invincibility. So, if invincibility is closely tied to resilience, and resilience is something that you cannot achieve without a strong support system and a strong and diverse society, then it's pretty clear, to me at least, how the puzzle piece of neurodiversity fits into that. I know puzzle pieces are kind of a sketchy thing to bring up, but it's a common thing that neurotypical use, so I thought it was funny. So as I mentioned before, that in an ensemble cast, try saying that 3 times fast. You need a wide variety of people and personalities in order to face any situation that you come across. And that's true in society as well. And I think that's part of the reason why things are as fucked up as they are, is because we don't have a diverse group of people making decisions. It's all old money, white dudes who are from a specific generation, who grew up in a specific way, that led to them being able to have the influence to make decisions, because the system kind of reinforces that kind of definition of power. If it was opened up to voices from more backgrounds, I feel like we wouldn't be in most of the situations that we are in now. And I feel like the internet is allowing more people to get their voices out there, and that's a great thing, but it's still in the early stages of actually having that be a force of power and not just a force of more division. And of course, now that I think of it, I'm pretty sure Dr. Impossible is on the autism spectrum as well. I think most scientists lie somewhere on the spectrum because of the nature of science and STEM as a field or fields. Like, you gotta be a little bit obsessive at least in order to stick with something that long and to have that much patience for it. So, in a way, he's a foil for Black Wolf as well in that case. And that autism doesn't make you inherently good or inherently evil. It creates challenges in your life, but depending on how you face those challenges, that really defines your path. However, it seems like Black Wolf at least had a support system early on in life that Dr. Impossible did not have. And maybe if he had had a better support system, he wouldn't have ended up where he is now. Or maybe he was just so far up his own ass at that point that wouldn't have mattered. We will never know for sure. And as a little bit of a fun side note, I totally ship Fatal and Lily. I think they have such cute chemistry going on. They even had a scene where they both curled up on the couch and watched a documentary together. It was so cute. I am aware that that is totally not intentional, but that's the fun of shipping, is to find something that the author totally didn't intend and run with it. Another kind of funny side note is I'm starting to read Punk Rock Dad, which I picked up from the library that I mentioned in my last video. And it was kind of funny because reading the origin story of Pennywise from the lead singer's perspective, he did not have a great time at school because he was cross-eyed since birth and kids bullied him from an early age about it. And so he decided he was going to be kind of the class clown and be weird and silly to so that the kids were laughing at something other than his eyes. And that kind of led to him being a punk rock singer, which kind of ties in, which parallels Dr. Impossible's villain origin story. If you're the weird kid who's constantly bullied at school, you have two options. You can be a punk rock singer or a supervillain. Or both. That'd be really cool. Or you could be like me and just become a major bookworm and take out all your anger by playing bad guys in role-playing games.